Good morning, APUSHers. We are going to learn how to attack that very, very dreaded historian's perspective, the dueling perspectives in APUSH. And so once you get done with this video, hopefully you're going to feel a lot more comfortable, and with practice and in time, I think that this will actually not be as intimidating as you think it is. All right, so the first thing you really need to know is that this dueling historian's perspective is going to be your very first SAQ on the AP test. And so you really need to know how to attack it and how to approach it. Typically speaking, on average across the United States, this has been like the lowest scoring SAQ. But what I really, really believe is that once you learn how to attack this, it's not going to be as intimidating or as difficult. And, our APUSHers, they do this all year long, school year long, and they continue to practice it. And by the time they get to the AP test, they're not at all intimidated by this. They actually find this, some of them find this to be the easier one because they've learned how to really approach this. So what we're going to do is we're going to first do an example together, and then I'm going to give you some key pointers on how to attack it one more time. Okay? So let's go ahead and start practicing. Okay, APUSHers, so now what we're going to do is we're going to practice together on a real SAQ. This is one that's been released, and so it's publicly available. But let's take a look at this one. Okay, and this should be familiar because we've been studying the Revolution. So here are two historians, Nash and Mayer, and we're going to figure out exactly how to approach this. Okay, so the very first step you need to do, believe it or not, is not to read the excerpts. What I want you to do is we're going to read what it says in A. So A says, briefly describe one major difference between Nash and Mayer's historical interpretations of the origins of the American Revolution. So we know what we're looking for is to look at, they're going to have competing views on the origins of the American Revolution. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to read these carefully. Now that we know that we're looking for the origins of the American Revolution, so now we'll read the excerpts. So from Nash, although 18th century America was predominantly rural, agricultural society, its seaboard commercial cities were the cutting edge of economic, social, and political change. In America, in the colonial cities, that was the transition first occurred from a barter economy to a commercial one. The cities predicted the future. Urban people, at a certain point in the pre-industrial era, upset the equilibrium of an older system of social relations and turned the seaboard towns into crucibles of revolutionary agitation. Okay, so Nash is basically arguing that the origins of the American Revolution come from those seaboard cities, and those seaboard cities later create this change. Now let's read Mayer. The colonialist attitude toward civil uprising were part of a broader Anglo-American political tradition. In the course of the 18th century, colonists became increasingly interested in the ideas of tradition. By the 1760s, this tradition proved a strong unifying element between colonists north and south. It offered to a corpus of ideas about public authority and popular political responsibilities that shaped the American Revolutionary moment. Spokesmen for the English revolutionary tradition were distinguished in the 18th century. Above all, their outspoken defense of the people's right to rise up against their rulers. Okay, so Mayer is actually arguing that the origin of the American Revolution came from, it sounds a lot like Enlightenment ideas, right? So ideas that were kind of across the Atlantic. So they, Nash is arguing that it's coming from, from seaboard cities that kind of rose up politically and economically, and Mayer is talking about how it is changed with Enlightenment ideas. Okay, so how do we write that? First, of course, we label it A, and so now, let's go ahead and focus in on how we are going to approach that. So the ACE method is always what you're going to do. So start with A, which is literally to restate what it's asking. Okay? Okay, so here's my opening sentence with what we just discussed. So this would be the A and ACE for letter A. One difference in the historical interpretations of the origins of the American Revolution, notice I just turned it around, between Nash and Mayer, was that Nash believed the origin began in coastal cities as part of an economic and political change, while Mayer believed the origins of the revolution stemmed from political ideas and writings coming across the Atlantic. Now in B and C in this, we are going to further paraphrase and not quote, remember never to quote, in any SAQ what Nash thought and then what Mayer thought. So here are my next sentences. Nash argued that the commercial aspects of the cities were the source of changing political thought. Mayer argued that the ideas of 17th century philosophers inspired the American Revolution. Okay, so now it's time to go to B and C. Okay, you know that you're going to have to come up with an example for B and C that is not explicitly mentioned in the excerpts. They're always going to say that. So it's almost like in a DBQ where you come up with the outside evidence. You have to come up with something that they don't mention that would help further or advance their argument. Notice in this opening line, this is the A and ACE, and the A and ACE is super critical when you're doing B and C on these arguments. Okay, so turn it around, and I'll tell you why in a second. One specific historical event or development from the time period 1754 to 1800. Also important is the time period. If you pick an event outside of that, you will not get the point. That is not explicitly mentioned in the excerpt that could support Nash's argument. Now, I put it in bold here, but obviously you don't have to do that. The reason I do is because if you don't mention Nash and you go on with a specific example, you will also not get the point, even if it's correct. So that is why that A and ACE is really important, because it helps you make sure you're answering what is asked. Okay, so now we'll go on with an example. Okay, so I said one specific historic event or development from the time period 1754 to 1800 that is not explicitly mentioned in the excerpt that could support Nash's argument are the many protests that occurred in seaport cities such as Boston. So it's specific. So then I gave it an example, the Boston Tea Party. This is the C. The example or further explanation is an example of a protest in a coastal city that occurred when angry colonists dumped English tea into Boston Harbor to dissent against taxation. Now the E part, so this is critical. You have to tell me how this helps prove Nash's theory. This helps prove Nash's theory that the origins of the American Revolution occurred in coastal cities like Boston, who were most affected by the taxation from Great Britain. So again, now I'm going to rephrase the last part here. One specific event or historical development from the time period 1754 to 1800 that is not explicitly mentioned in the excerpt that could support Mayer's argument. Okay, so now I'm ready to go ahead because I've started with the A and ACE in this C. Okay, and so lastly I'll finish it up. One specific historic event of the development from the period 1754 to 1800 that is not explicitly mentioned in the excerpt that could support Mayer's argument are the reflection of Enlightenment ideas in the revolutionary writing. One example of this was the Declaration of Independence, which borrowed ideas from English Enlightenment thinker John Locke on natural rights. This helps prove Mayer's argument that political ideas of the Enlightenment were the source of the revolution because nearly identical ideas appeared in revolutionary political writing. Okay, so again, when you do this, ACE, and that's how you approach the ACE for all three of them. Okay, and when you write something like this, this would be like a home run hit, full 3 points. Okay, so just to review the steps to attack it, read A first as part of it. So read A first, okay? The next thing is, because when you read A first, it's going to tell you exactly what you need to look for. Then read the two excerpts carefully and decide how the two are different. Think about an example that's not mentioned in either one of the excerpts that will help you answer that. Then, the fourth step, attack it with ACE. Remember to literally restate what's asked in A. This is critical for B and C, as I mentioned before. C further explains the example, and the answers for B and C using E should explain how that helps you prove that historian's perspective. So if you do all of those, I promise you this is not going to be as difficult as you think it might be. So good luck, APUSHers. Let me know if you have any questions.